Hi, friends. Welcome back to the You and Me podcast. I'm your host, Carolina, and I have a lot to talk about this episode. I'm just going to get right into it and say about 3 days ago, was canned for my job. That's right. I wouldn't necessarily say fired, but I currently don't have a job. And let's rewind and talk about what happened. As some of you may know, I have been in a self-discovery journey on trying to find a job that feels sustainable for me, that feels like I'm still able to be a human, that still supports me in being creative, and ultimately doesn't require every ounce of energy out of me. So when I am off of work, I am still able to do the things and the hobbies and see the people and enjoy the trips that I plan on doing. I had this job back in May. It's now September. And if you have been listening to the podcast, you have probably already have been able to tell that the job was eventually going to come to an end. Now, I obviously wish that it was more on my terms, but in all reality, I'm really happy that this happened. I feel a sense of freedom. I feel a sense of excitement. And I feel like each time I end a job, it feels like a significant chapter is ending. And it feels like each time I'm getting closer and closer into what it is that I'm trying to discover. And this is the whole reason I started this podcast, and trying to discover what can I do in order to earn money that will not have me feeling resentful, that will not require every waking hour of me to think about the job or prepare for the job or be in the job. And I have obviously come to the mature conclusion that I need a job. I have bills to pay. I have trips I want to do. I have a puppy I'd want to buy. And as we know now in 2025, money isn't happiness, but it sure is a tool. I want to rewind and talk about the last couple weeks. And the first thing I want to talk about is I'd mentioned before that I was feeling like I was spending a lot of time after work or at the end of the day just turning on the TV, and kind of that was my way of decompression. And although at times that can be quite enjoyable, when done too much, just like anything in life, it starts to become not helpful, not productive. And I shouldn't use the word productive, but it starts to feel like a waste of my time. The reason I don't want to say productive is we definitely live in a society where we are taught that being productive at every waking moment is the only way to succeed. That's a lie, personally. I think, honestly, a lot of things that we were taught are, quite frankly, lies. And I feel this because we are all taught as young kids, most of us, when we come from a middle class working household, we see our parents working hard, and we're often told that if you go to school, you get good grades, you follow the rules, you get into a nice college, you then graduate college, and you find your career job. Now, we all know that there's plenty of us that have gone down that path, myself included, and success doesn't just fall into your lap. In fact, I think success is a mixture of privilege, luck, knowing the right people, and sometimes having the upper hand. And when I say upper hand, when we talk about programs such as internships that require somebody to essentially work for free, that isn't really something that myself, it isn't something that I had access to, because in my college experience, I had to work full time. And as you may or may not know, I began my work in hospitality, aka restaurants, because that was the one area that you didn't have to have much experience in. you could land a job, and they were very flexible with your work schedule. So it worked. And without realizing that, because I was in restaurants, I had no idea that that was going to be what the next 10 years look like. And I have been in this journey of trying to actively get out of this. And so when I found this job back in May, I thought that I had hit the jackpot. The owner of the space had this incredible energy about them. They seemed like they were on top of the world. They are a mom, they're a wife, they're a business owner, they own multiple places. I really felt like I was going to learn a lot from this person. And at the end of the day, I had a lot of trust, thinking that they would take care of me and I would take care of them. Now, without to just throw them under the bus and bore everyone with all the details, I think what I really have been reflecting out of this situation was quickly on when I got the job. There were a lot of things that personally didn't fly with myself. Things of, being paid late, or improper communication, not being able to really get trained in the right way. I was reflecting on this, that I'm the type of worker that in the beginning of any job, I like to be very observant. I like to be quite to myself, and I really like to understand what is going on, what is everybody's role, and I would like to be shown what a good job is. I don't want to come in and have too much of confidence or push people aside and say, "Hey, look at me." Like, I'm more so of the person that will tend to shine bright once I'm kind of warmed up and I'm acquainted and I really understand the systems that are going. Once I'm in a job for a couple months, then I believe that I'm really able to, you know, be creative or add my personality. But in those beginning stages, I'm very much so a reserved human being. And in a lot of experiences I've recently had when hired onto a job, without being upfront about it, you can tell that they're hiring you on in a way to be a savior. They are essentially so overwhelmed and looking for someone that can just jump into the job and just knows what to do without proper training or without much supervision. They just want this person to kind of alleviate some of their stresses. And as time progressed, I also realized that, being in a hybrid job was a luxury for myself. It was something that I had been dreaming of, that I had put on my board, that I have been just hoping that would be my next step. And I was so incredibly grateful to be able to experience that type of work. I really realized that for me, that really is the equation of work-life balance. You're able to go on a walk when you need to stretch your body, to be in a space that feels safe and comfortable and conducive to just allowing you to kind of think. I also believe when you have the ability to work in your own space, you can time block and make lists and really find things that work for you, without having the pressures of just being on 24/7. But I realized that a lot of the job that I was doing was just answering emails, and it became really boring and mundane. And because I wasn't necessarily treated in the way that I wanted to be treated, and I didn't feel like ultimately they were showing me the respect that I required, I quickly on just felt like I didn't care about the job. And I know that that was very much so seen in my work. There was zero effort. I mean, for the most part of the day, I would be really trying to focus on these emails, but in my head thinking that I don't care about this. And that goes to my point of discovering really what it is that I care about, because we all know you can sit here and try to read something or try to hear a story of something, but if you have no interest in it, personally, it feels like it goes in one ear and out the other ear. And I am just really excited to step into the next phase. I know that I have been here multiple times, whether it's me leaving the job or basically the job coming to an end. I want to not just sugarcoat it and say that this is perfect, because of course I don't have a plan. I mean, I do have a plan, but I don't have savings saved up, and I wish that it was more so on my timeline. But as someone who's been here before, the first tip I want to talk about is fear. I know that fear is the common driving force for us to do a lot of things, and ultimately fear of not being able to pay your bills or have food on the table or have a roof over your head is a really real emotion nowadays. And I know that a lot of people have felt that way. And recently, really, what I have been tapping into is understanding that fear and sitting with that fear, but having a sense of faith. And I was thinking about this today, that when we think about faith or spirituality or religion, everybody has their own opinions, everybody has what works for them. And I ultimately think that what works for one person isn't going to work for the next person, and it really is up to the individual to find their own sense of spirituality or meaning or religion or whatever you want to call it. But one thing I find fascinating is oftentimes you think of religion as this, how can I describe it? Religion is more so something that, we are brought into in larger groups, and it has this mass history. And then you think of spirituality nowadays, and spirituality feels like this woo-woo thing. And even the word woo-woo to me feels quite disrespectful, because it is, again, like in common media, expressing how those things may be silly or those things aren't really real. And I think that, again, when you think about faith or spirituality or belief, like those things are very individual, and those are usually found through your own darkest times of life, where you have to tap into something other than yourself. And I have been going through this journey of setting boundaries and having confidence and having a sense of self-esteem, and through that really trying to have my job match where I'm at. And I think so much of the common narrative that I've recently heard is, part of being an adult means you suck it up. Part of being an adult means you do things you don't want to do, and you stick around to jobs that you may not love, because at least you're getting your bills paid and you have people to take care of. And I sometimes wish that I could just do that, but there's something so deep inside of me that when I'm put in these spaces that I know aren't right, or I'm put in these jobs that are asking me to do something that doesn't sit well with myself, I ultimately get to a point where I think, no more. I can't do this anymore. And I don't want to do this anymore. And I think that there's so much more to life than just working in a job that you hate. If you have to do something day in, day out, I want to be around people that inspire me and that I enjoy and that I work well with. And when we think about a job, we think about, who are the people you're working with? What are their personalities? There are some personalities that work really well together, and there's some personalities that don't. And I think that oftentimes I recently, and I know last week's episode, we were talking about how dating is very similar to finding a job in so many ways. And I think that so many of us show up into our interviews saying what we think this person wants to hear. We have this professional script that tells people that we're multitaskers and we're detail oriented and problem solvers, and willing to go the extra mile. And I was reflecting upon that and thinking, like, if I want to find a job that is actually in alignment with myself, I have to start to be honest. And when given the opportunity to do interviews, I have to really let the person know who I am and not who I think they want me to be, because that gives a fair opportunity for me to let them know that these are my requirements. This is how I show up. This is who I am. And ultimately, the job can say, not a good fit. And it saves me the headache from continuing this path of doing work that just isn't aligned. Or, and the more wishful, hopeful thought, similar to dating, is when you go into a date, you go into a job and you let them know this is who I am, then magic can happen. So some things I've been reflecting about that are really important to me, as I've stated before, is being in a job that's hybrid, that gives me the flexibility that I still love people, I still love interacting. I just can't do that every day because it energetically is a lot to be on and to be listening and to be in people's space and to be aware of the environment. That is something that I can do great, but not every day. Another thing I've come to the conclusion of is that when I start a job, I need the job to be clear. I need them to be concise. I need them to have a sense of structure and consistency in their schedule, in what's expected, in the way that they outline the job. Meaning, I think it's really beneficial when you begin a job is, how is someone trained? And I've talked about this before as someone who has trained before. I think that oftentimes when people are training you, they're just doing what they're doing that day. And it could be in the middle of a thought. It could be in the middle of a project. And I always have these questions arise. Well, let's really go from the beginning. I'm talking the minute that I step into the building, you're giving me a tour of the building. You're acquainting me with where the restrooms are, where I can find water. That's that first step of allowing me to feel comfortable and to really allow my brain to open up and now receive the information. If you're showing me an email, you're showing me where you're logging in, what the login is, any nuances like that. You're really breaking down something that seems simple to you, but you're really breaking it down for a person. Like I think about in school when we had to write, like, how do you make a peanut butter and jelly? And it was that question of like, if you say, okay, you just need bread, peanut butter, and jelly, and then you say spread the peanut butter, it's like, well, you forgot to let the person know that they have to get a knife. So now are they using their hand? And again, it may sound silly if you've done the job for years, but you really have to get down to the level of, hey, if I want to properly train somebody, or if I want somebody to do a good job, I have to train somebody, and I have to be thorough, and I have to be clear. I think another thing I realized with myself is that I am a very literal person. If somebody says, hey, tomorrow I'll meet you at 11 o'clock, I will be there at 10:59. But to somebody else, 11 o'clock would be 11-ish, meaning that they could get there anytime between 11 or 12. Once I get those type of answers, it drives me crazy because I need clear, literal directions. If I say I'm going to do something, I follow through with it. And that gets me to my point of, I shared a couple episodes ago that I was really trying to be more aware of, rather than at the end of the night just popping on the TV, really trying to do more activities like reading a book or watercoloring or journaling or calling a friend, things that still have that same relaxation effect, but not as intense as a TV. Because when you think about it, when consuming TV, consuming media in general, there are so many things that are great about it. You could learn something, you could be inspired, you could relax, but at the same time, I think overconsumption of it, you start to recognize like, how is this actually affecting my day-to-day thoughts? For example, I recently just started to rewatch The Hills. The Hills, Laguna Beach, like these are all the shows that I really enjoyed because again, like the characters are humans. It seems like as you're watching this reality TV show that it feels like real life. But when you really start to think about it, you're like, in these shows, there's zero diversity. We already know that that is an incredibly huge problem to, as a young person, as an adult, whoever you are, to not be represented by the masses makes you automatically feel like there's something wrong with you or that you are less than what is being represented. I was also chuckling because there was a scene in the beginning where Lauren is given this incredible opportunity to work for Teen Vogue, and they bring her in to do the interview. And the way that she showed up to the interview, although you could make the argument that she was authentic because she was like, I really love fashion and I'm really excited about this and I really want this. It makes me chuckle because, as we know in an interview, the classic question, like, why do you want to work here? If all you say is, I really want to work here because I'm really excited about the brand, it again is almost like a meaningless saying, because the reality of asking, why do you want to work here? They're really asking, what are you going to do for us? That's like, again, our what the real thing is. What are you going to do for us? And the other question too is, tell us a bit about yourself. Again, they really don't care about your hobbies or your interests. Of course, if you can somehow tie that into a professional way that relates to the job, I think that's incredible, and that is more power to you. But ultimately, when you're asked, tell us about yourself, it's really giving a short, almost like sales pitch of, here's my credential, here's what I've done, and here's why I'm the best fit for the job. And it's again in these languages when you're young or when you maybe have not been taught this, that you really do show up in that literal way, because that is how we often, even the question of how are you, like, it's such a question that we've now all adopted, that is a way to be polite. That is a way to say hi to somebody, like, hey, how are you? How's it going? But that question always drives me crazy, because the reality is, like, they don't care about what's going on. I think when you really care about what's going on, you're having those one-on-one conversations with a friend or a partner or a family member, and you're really like that, you're having this space being held for you. But in passing, when someone asks, how's it going, you just say good. It's a really normal thing to do. But what I was thinking with consuming TV was that, watching all these shows as a young kid, I wonder how much of that, like, subconsciously makes you think a certain way, whether you think that's what success is, or that's what the world looks like, or that's how I should show up into a job interview. And all of those things are highly incorrect. But I say this to say that what I've actively been doing is trying to read more. I think that reading is just such an incredible thing that we have access to. We are able to still relax, and we're able to get comfy, and we're able to be still, but we're able to read something that can really expand or get you out of your own mind. And it feels good on the eyes. It is enjoyable. And for me, I've always been a person who has enjoyed non-fictional stories, meaning I always like to think non-fictional, not fake. I've always envied the people that could read fictional stories, but there's something about reading that I think as a young kid it was beaten down into you that you need to read. Like, you always had to read for school, and so it almost felt like a punishment. It never felt enjoyable. And I can remember the books that I read were just awful. The biggest one that comes to mind is Moby Dick, which I've never even read the story, to be honest. I think 90% of the stories in school I never read. I would always spark note. But I really do enjoy reading when it comes to something of interest. And something that has been really interesting to me is this idea of money and finance and investing. And we all know that money is a tool. It's a way to level up. It's a way that nowadays, unfortunately, like when having money, you have your baseline set, and then the next thing is you really get those luxuries in life. And unfortunately, we know that in our system, health now is not something that we give to people. Food is not something we give to people. Housing is not something we give to people. Although we know that that is what you need in order to be an aligned person, a happy person, a healthy person. Like all of those things are non-negotiable. But because we live in a capitalistic society, we have made those things for a select few. For example, I think about, yoga or Pilates. Again, usually what you see represented are these type of women that fit the mold of, going to Pilates and veganism and going to cafes. These are, again, all like luxury items that not everybody has accessibility to. And then you start to see that and think, oh, I'm less than because maybe I can't afford a Pilates class or I can't afford a yoga class. And I think that the reality is that some of that is true. And I also think that the beauty of health is a lot of the things that we think we need to buy, we have access to. For example, your breath, mindfulness, community. These are all things that you can tap into with maybe not having all of the money in the world. So going back to reading, I read this book called The Simple Path to Wealth by J.L. Collins, and I highly recommend for anybody that is working on getting out of debt, that is interested in investing. I think that the book is really easy to digest, and there's a part of myself that is a little enraged when reading it because, again, you think like, had I read this book when I was 18, I probably wouldn't even be making this podcast because I would probably be, well off by now. But I bring this book up because it really inspired me. And when I was reading it, it made me feel really empowered. And that feeling of being empowered is something that I think is worth so much money. When we live in a world right now where we are constantly having people tell us when we're going to eat, what time are we going to go to work, when we're off of work. And there's so much of me that just has this like burning feeling of like, who are you to tell me when and how those things are going to happen for myself when I'm on my own path? And I think that emotion of empowerment keeps coming up for myself, where I have been in this path before of not having a job. And like I said, it's not necessarily comfortable. And there is a pressure of, hey, this is real life, and there are bills and food and things that, I need money to take care of that. But I also right now feel really like all of this is happening for the good of myself. And going back to this job, at the end of the day, this person isn't able to truly take care of themselves, to take care of all the responsibilities that they made. So I can't expect them to take care of me or to put me first. They merely put themselves first, which anybody in their position, I'm sure, would have done the same thing. And now I'm just thinking that it's time for me to put myself first. And essentially, what I am really excited to do is show you guys and tell you guys tips and tricks on how I'm going to find a job that's more suited for myself, because I believe in having a sense of routine and a sense of structure and a sense of discipline. But at the same time, I think something that is so incredibly crucial is having a sense of creativity and community and fun. And I think the mixture of those really can make a life that feels worth living and that doesn't feel like you're getting bogged down by the to-dos. As you see humans get older, they lose the sense of silliness and playfulness, and you're just beaten down by society, and you're beaten down by all of the have tos and all of the responsibilities, and you really lose sight of what is it that you want to do. And that's something I've been asking myself of course, at the end of the day, that job was not a place I wanted to be at. I didn't find joy in it. I didn't find excitement in it. And I didn't feel like I was being respected. And so why not close that door and find something that is bringing me all of those things? So I am excited for you guys to join me on this path. And I'm going to be sharing some tips and tricks. And I just feel like I'm in the right place in the right time. And I know that if you're currently in a situation where you don't have job security, I know it can be really scary, but the universe has a better plan for you. And all that you have control over is being compassionate and kind to yourself, is trying to take care of your mental health and your physical health and your spiritual health, to take care of your community and the friends and the family and the people and the animals around you. And the rest of it, it's all working out the way it needs to. So I'm excited. Join me in this journey as I take you into the path of finding something that is way more aligned with myself. Thank you guys for listening as always, and stay tuned. Peace.